The Alpha King chose revenge over love. His rejected Luna returned, as the queen of every northern pack. Kael Ashborn stood at the front of the great hall, dressed in white and gold, while Wren Callahan waited beside him in a dress she had chosen herself, one with small blue flowers stitched along the hem, because blue had always been her favorite color. The hall was full. 43 guests sat in neat rows, and a 3-tier cake waited on a table near the window, untouched, waiting for a celebration that would never come. Kael cleared his throat. He did not look at her. I, Alpha Kael Ashborn, reject Wren Callahan as my Luna. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a woman near the back gasped, and a chair scraped against the floor, and somebody's fork clattered onto a plate. Wren felt the pack bond break inside her chest, a sharp, hollow ache that spread through her ribs and settled somewhere she could not name. She did not cry, she did not shout. She picked up the glass of water in front of her, drank it slowly, and placed it back down without a sound. Later, people would say she took it well. They did not know that taking it well was simply the only thing left for her to do. The reason came out slowly over the following days, the way bad news always does, in pieces passed between servants and half-heard conversations. Kael's father had made an old promise to the Voss pack in the south, a promise involving land and a trade route, and a debt owed since before Kael was even born. The Voss pack had a daughter, and that daughter came with land, gold, and a strong bloodline. Wren came from a small pack that no longer held any value on a map. Her love had never been the problem. Her worth on paper was. She left that same night. She did not wait for the sun to rise, or for anyone to explain themselves further. She packed one bag, took her car, and drove north until the roads grew narrow, and the radio stopped picking up any stations at all. The Northern Territory was cold, poor, and mostly forgotten. 6 small packs lived scattered across it, packs too weak and too poor to matter to anyone outside their own borders. They fought each other over frozen rivers and half-empty hunting grounds, wasting what little they had on quarrels that led nowhere. Wren arrived with nothing but a bag, a broken heart, and a strange kind of clarity that only comes after losing everything at once. She had nothing left to protect, which meant she had nothing left to fear losing. She started small. She helped an old healer in one of the northern packs treat a group of sick children during a harsh winter. She negotiated a peace between 2 feuding families. After a dispute over grazing land nearly turned into a fight. Word spread slowly, the way it does in small places, from one mouth to another, until people began asking for her by name instead of by chance. It was not fast. It was not easy. There were nights she sat alone in a small cabin with no heat, wrapped in a blanket, wondering if she had made the right choice by running instead of staying to fight for herself. But each time that thought came, she remembered the sound of Kael's voice, speaking those 4 words in front of everyone she knew, and the memory gave her the strength to keep going. 3 years passed. In that time, Wren built something nobody expected. She united all 6 northern packs under one banner, calling it the Frostline Coalition. She was not chosen because of her bloodline, or her beauty, or her family name. She was chosen because she listened to people when nobody else had, because she settled disputes fairly, and because she proved, again and again, that she would rather build something lasting than win a quick argument. The northern packs, once divided and poor, became known for something new: peace. Trade opened between territories that had once refused to speak to each other. Borders that used to see conflict every season stayed quiet for years at a time. People who once slept fearfully began sleeping without worry. Wren became known simply as Alpha Thorne, a name she chose herself the day she decided that Wren Callahan, the woman who had been left standing in a wedding dress, no longer existed. She kept her first name because it still meant something to her, but Callahan belonged to a life that had ended the night the bond snapped. Thorne was who she had become instead, sharp where she needed to be, unshakable where it counted, but never unkind without reason. Meanwhile, in the south, Kael's life did not go the way his father had promised. The alliance with the Voss pack brought land, yes, and gold, yes, but it also brought years of quiet arguments, cold dinners, and a marriage that existed only on paper. The wife his father chose for him never loved him, and he never learned to love her either. They shared a title and a roof, nothing more. Kael became Alpha King 2 years after the rejection, taking his father's place when the old man passed peacefully in his sleep. The crown weighed heavier than he expected. Every decision he made he questioned. Every quiet night in his empty study, he thought of the woman who used to laugh at bad television shows and cry during his sister's wedding speech. He told himself, over and over, that the choice had been necessary. A king had to think of his people first. Love was a luxury kings could not always afford. He almost believed it, almost. Then news reached his court of a coalition forming in the north, one that had somehow, quietly and without a single battle, united 6 packs that had fought each other for 2 generations. When the messenger read the name of the Alpha who led it, Kael sat very still. Wren Thorne, the messenger said, she has requested a summit regarding shared hunting borders and water rights along the northern river. For a moment, Kael did not respond. It could not be the same Wren. His Wren had been soft-spoken, gentle, someone who preferred staying home over standing in front of crowds. But the messenger described a leader who spoke with confidence, who settled arguments with calm words instead of raised voices, who had turned frozen, forgotten land into something worth respecting. He agreed to the summit before he let himself think too long about why his hands were shaking. The day Wren arrived at the summit hall, the room fell quiet the moment she walked through the doors. She wore simple dark clothing, nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress anyone. She did not need decoration to command attention. Her presence alone did that. Kael stood from his chair, an old habit from manners taught to him as a child. Wren, he said, before he could stop himself. She looked at him, and for a brief second, something flickered behind her eyes, something that might have been memory, or might have simply been recognition of an old acquaintance. Then it was gone. Alpha Thorne, she corrected, gently but firmly. It was not said with anger. It was said the way one might correct someone using the wrong name for a stranger, polite but distant, closing a door so softly you might miss the sound if you were not paying attention. Kael understood, in that single moment, that the woman standing in front of him was not the same person he had left behind. She had rebuilt herself entirely, and there was no trace of the girl who used to wait for him by the window every evening. The negotiations lasted 2 full days. They discussed water rights along the shared river, hunting boundaries between northern and southern territories, and safe passage for traders moving between the regions. Wren spoke clearly and fairly, always willing to compromise where compromise made sense, but never backing down on points that mattered to her people. Kael found himself watching her more than he watched the maps spread across the table, noticing the calm confidence in the way she carried herself, so different from the nervous young woman he remembered. On the second evening, after the day's discussions ended, Kael found her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the training grounds below. The night air was cool, and the stars were unusually bright, the kind of clear sky only the northern territories seemed to offer. He walked toward her slowly. Some old part of him expected the pull of the pack bond to draw him closer, the way it used to, forgetting that the bond no longer existed. He had broken it himself, that night in front of everyone, and no amount of walking toward her would bring it back. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. She did not turn around right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You made a decision. Please do not confuse the two. It is not fair to either of us. Wren, if I could go back." "Alpha Thorne," she said again, softer this time, but just as firm. He fell silent for a moment, gathering the words he had practiced in his head more times than he could count over the last 3 years. He spoke about his father, about the promise made long before he had any say in the matter, about the weight of duty that came with being born into a family that ruled. He explained how young he had been, how afraid, how certain he had convinced himself that sacrificing one thing meant protecting everything else. Wren listened without interrupting. When he finished, she turned to face him fully for the first time since arriving. "I don't need you to explain why you did it," she said. "I understood the reasons a long time ago. What I needed, back then, was for you to choose me anyway. You didn't. I stopped waiting for you to change your mind somewhere during my first winter alone, building something out of nothing, with no one to help me, and no one to blame but myself if I failed. I am not interested in a king who wants his queen back only after she no longer needs a king to stand beside her." Her words were calm, without bitterness, which somehow made them land harder than if she had shouted. Kael had no response, because there was nothing left to argue. She was right, and both of them knew it. The summit ended the next morning, with signed agreements on water rights and trade routes, a handshake exchanged between them that lasted exactly as long as good manners required, and not a moment longer. Wren's convoy left before noon, wagons loaded with supplies for the return journey north, her guards falling into formation around her, without needing instruction. Kael watched from the same window his father used to stand at, the one overlooking the road where visitors and traders once arrived, seeking favor from the Ashborn pack. He understood now, fully and completely, the weight of what he had given up that night 3 years ago. It was not simply a woman he had lost. It was a partner who could have stood beside him through every difficult decision, who had proven, without his help, that she was capable of building peace where others saw only conflict. Wren did not look back as her convoy disappeared down the northern road. She had used up all her looking back years earlier, alone in a small cabin during her first winter in the north, when she cried until there was nothing left, and decided the next morning that crying would no longer be how she spent her days. She had rebuilt her entire life from nothing, piece by piece, and she was not willing to hand any part of it back to a man who only wanted her once she no longer needed rescuing. Kael eventually returned to his duties, ruling his kingdom with the same careful attention he had learned to give every decision since taking the crown. He never remarried, though his advisors urged him to for years afterward. He kept the peace agreements signed with the Frostline coalition, and trade between North and South continued to grow steadily over the following seasons. Wren continued leading her coalition of six-packs, strengthening the bonds between territories that once could not stand each other, building schools, training grounds, and safe roads where fear used to live. She never remarried either, though she was not without suitors. She simply found that her life, finally built entirely on her own terms, needed nothing added to feel complete. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, she thought of the wedding dress with small blue flowers stitched along the hem, still packed away in a box she had never opened again. She did not think of it with sadness anymore. She thought of it the way one thinks of an old lesson learned the hard way, painful once, but ultimately necessary, because without that night, she never would have discovered exactly how strong she truly was. And somewhere in the south, Kael sat alone in his study most evenings, staring at maps of a northern territory he could visit for trade, but never truly reach again, understanding at last that some choices, once made, cannot be unmade, no matter how much time passes or how much regret follows behind them.